year-on-year basis include a disruption in the supply of food products, an increase in import costs due to persistent currency depreciation, and general increase in the cost of production. I'll be going over some of these issues with my guest, Isa Aliyu Shatta, economist and VP, Konga Pay. Welcome to Inside Aliyu Shatta. It's been a bit.
Thank you very much. It's good to have you back.
Great. Wonderful. Of course, Isa Aliyu Shatta is in Lagos. He's joining us via Zoom. I flipped through the NBS data, and according to the report, on a month-on-month basis, the urban inflation rate was 1.79% in August 2022. This shows a 0.03% decline compared to July 2022, which stood at 1.82%. But even within that context, there are still variations. And I'm talking about the differentials in urban-rural inflation rates depending on the month. So I know there are countries in Africa worse than where Nigeria, maybe where we are currently, and maybe in other parts of the world. But a runaway inflation, or what they call hyperinflation, will spell doom for us economically. But not to make light of our rather dire situation, does it not seem like we are already at the point where there are distortions in economic decisions, even those concerning savings and investments?
Well, not necessarily, but yes, those are key indicators and key factors that are actually mitigating against all of these dynamics that you've just spoken about. And if you want to drill down, compare the August 2022 inflation year on year compared to last year, 2021, you will see that there was an increase of 3.52%, when you compare year on year. If you drill down, just like you have also said, we have some states, who are actually floating on top. And sadly, those states are actually basically southern states, right? Bayelsa, for instance, is part of those states. Rivers, for instance, is part of the states. And the states who have lower, percentage in terms of, inflation rate are actually also, funny enough, in the Northwest. You have states like Zamfara. You have states like Katsina. Then you also have, surprisingly, states like Borno State, where you have large insurgency rate and all that. So it is in the Northwest, where you ordinarily think we should also have that, if it is even marginal increase because of the activities of insecurity, banditry, and the rest. We are just seeing that, happening side by side. One can explain the reason why you see that hyperinflation. This inflation we are seeing is actually inflation that is not actually driven by the fiscal policy or by the monetary policy, but by circumstances that are geared, towards demand and supply. Circumstances that are geared towards supply chains, basically. And there is the ripple effect with what is happening globally, because even inflation rate is going higher.
Across the world, exacerbated by the Ukraine-Russia conflict, well, as per food inflation.
Exactly. So, but if you look at it, drill down, you have the high increase in corn, in wheat, in gas. Drill down to Nigeria. This should be an advantage to us, because we are saying we want to push the agricultural sector and drive the agricultural sector to be export-driven. But unfortunately, we are not able to actually flatten the curve or even meet the demand. Why? The reason is not far-fetched. I have mentioned insecurity earlier, right? There is a lot of people moving. There's this rural-urban drift because people are no longer comfortable. They are no longer, secured or safe to farm. And when you have little hands involved in farming activities, there are ripple effects. Even those who are already in farming activities, we've heard on the news where farmers have to pay to gain access to their farm. All of these things will have a cushion effect. They will have their own multiplier effect negatively on food items. Now, if you also look at the over-dollarization of our politics, where there is a lot of huge money in circulation. So there are money.
I remember you and I having this conversation on dollarization of the Nigerian economy.
Exactly. And if you look at the money in circulation, especially during this period of the politics, where there were a lot of cash in circulation and all. So that can explain to you why we have a lot of, that percentage increase in urban area in the southern states, and you have lesser in the northern state. But then
it's an amalgam of various issues. I mean, you've rightly pointed that out. It's quite fascinating, the variation and how intrinsic it is. And I mean, when you look at the variations between the urban and rural area, and you've mentioned a few states, so I would like to follow up on that line of thought. I don't know, but I'm sure you may have the report there with you. But let's look at the core inflation. I mean, the core inflation axis, state by state, and you would notice that the inflation rate on a year-to-year basis was highest in Ebonyi with 25.33%, Rivers with 23.70%, and Bayelsa with 23.01%. And on the same year-on-year basis, food inflation was highest in Kwara with 30.80%, Ebonyi 28.06%, and yet again Rivers with 27.64%. Does it mean businesses in these states, as well as farmers and processors, maybe, are having a lot more difficult time than in other states? We already have identified some of these challenges. You've talked about them. There's also, you did not mention access to forest exchange, for instance, but of course,
I was arguing there actually.
You did not reference power shortages, that is electricity. There's also the issue of fuel scarcity and transportation. And let's not forget what happens with post-harvest losses arising from lack of adequate storage capacity. All of this. So my question really to you, Ali Shatta, is why do these states that I've mentioned earlier stand apart? And why are they the top notchers in the CPI for August?
Yeah, the reason is not far-fetched. And I've mentioned some of the factors that have contributed to that hike or that increase in those states. If you look at it critically, there has been shortage of movement of, food items from the north to the south, right? And with a lot of insecurity that is happening, the tension that is happening around, the political, environment has also exacerbated the reason why we are having this disparity. And if you look at these states that you have also mentioned,
yes,
you want to ask how many economic activities are they actually into? What is the capacity? What is the capacity of their agricultural output compared to the north, for instance? So that gives you that that gives you the disparity where the demand and supply is not equal. So you have more demand than supply, and that will ordinarily jack up prices because you have shortage of items in circulation and few people can also have access to it. And a lot of people have also adjusted their purchasing power, because right now when people have paid for rent, they pay for those essential services that can make their life just to sustain their life, basically to keep body and soul together. They also want to cut off unnecessary spending on luxury items, right? And that also gives them pressure to want to stock food items. But how many of them even have savings, to go into all of this? Majority of this, critical mass in the Nigerian population live on credit. And before you know it, when it's end of the month, they are either battling to settle their credit, and with high interest rates again. So there's a lot of pressure.
Well,
and
I know a lot of people also live on credits in the United States, in the UK, and other parts of Europe, some parts of Europe. And of course, I know they're also suffering rising inflation. But you interestingly raised a couple of issues in your last response. You talked about rising prices, cutting down on wastages and all of that. So, of course, there's no doubt that with rising inflation, purchasing power is reduced, hence the clamor in Nigeria for increased wages by workers across the country. But for that to happen, national revenue inflow must also go up. But seeing what is happening in our oil sector, which largely remains our mainstay, I wonder at the prospect. It's also intrinsically linked. Can you attempt to untangle the web and perhaps build one that could form a safety net enough to guarantee inflow of funds, cut unnecessary costs, and perhaps jumpstart our economy?
The truth is, one of the first things that we need to do is to cut excess wastages. Because that's one thing. Those are low-hanging fruit. Those are the things that we have control over almost instantaneously. Where you can say, let me give you an example. This might sound a little bit funny. Last year, NURTW in Lagos State generated about 129 billion. This is an informal sector. So if you look at that critical sector, which is the transportation sector, what can we do differently to harness the potential in this sector and ensure that those gains actually automatically count for tax, and the state or even the country at large can use it, in bettering the lives of people? This is just one of those aspects I think we can work on. We are talking about collecting tax in the informal sector. How well have we obtained more gains in this sector? The next thing that we also need to look at is data. If we have clean data, if you have data with people who are contributing to economic activity, it is easier for you to deduct at source, whatever tax you want to collect, to ensure that you also contribute back to the net. But you want to ask yourself one question. All of the tax that have been collected, or multiple taxation that has even happened, what impact have they actually had on the lives of those who are paying them? What economic impact have they had? Do we see clear-cut roadmap to say this is exactly what you want to do with what you are collecting versus what
Alicia, sorry to jump in here, but I really like your take on this issue of taxation, seeing that in other climes there is the clamor for reduction in taxation. Here we have issues of multiple taxation. What really is the balance? How can we balance it at a time like this where we're experiencing rising inflation? Should we be having increases in tax, in whether it's VAT or whether it's direct income taxation? How do we balance it out there so that, yes, government does generate increased revenue for taxation, yet the people do not suffer under the strain of multiple taxation?
Yeah, so that's exactly why I spoke about technology earlier, because if you have clean data-driven process, right? We have the joint tax force, right? They can come together, federal, state, local government, and identify different tax, channels or different tax items to say we are collecting on behalf of the local government and state. At the end of the collection, we split it based on percentage rate, and this is automatically disbursed. So with this, you can muzzle up a lot of firepower to come up with one single collection source that probably might have an aggregated sources of collection underneath them. But it is clean because you have one data set that you are using to collect tax. So this reduces over-taxation processes and also gives everybody transparency and accountability with good audit trail for everybody to be able to know that, yes, what is being collected is evenly distributed. That is on the one side. On the other part, talking about how we can cushion the effect. If we don't address the issue of insecurity, if we don't really attack it, and we are treating it on the surface, we will continue to have all of this impact in our economy. It's going to impact us negatively. So one of the major steps we need to take to ensure that we correct, what we are currently going through right now is to ensure that we address the issue of insecurity. It's a no-brainer. Once we are able to fix that aspect, people will now have confidence more to go back to farm. People cannot also do large-scale farming without fear, right? And that will immediately impact the economy because now we can also be export-driven. The war that Ukraine and Russia has created for us, created a market, but we are not taking advantage of that opportunity. Rather, this further exposes us to what we have been doing, which means we are largely consuming rather than producing.
I mean, I've heard people talk a lot. I've heard people gone down that lane, and it's quite unfortunate that we are where we are. But, you are from the private sector, so, this is an issue that those of you in the private sector monitor. So, in lots of cases, companies like yours, that act swiftly to respond and reposition can turn inflation and disruption into value and emerge as winners. You've spoken, Dali, to perhaps go that lane as well, flip the disruptions caused by inflation and emerge as winners.
I think basically it's willpower, right? The willpower to take first responsibility and secondly to execute. If you combine these two factors together, you will definitely get a positive result with whatever direction you want to take. But first, we need to be able to tell ourselves the truth, to say this is the challenge that we are facing, and these are steps that we have taken to ensure that we correct those challenges. And these are measures we have also put in place to ensure we measure our milestones, we measure the growth, we measure everything that we are doing based on the statistics that we get from NBS as well. So we sort of have a metrics to guide or to gauge the economy temperature to know that we are actually doing the right thing. But like I said, we need to stop talking. We need to start to execute. And until we begin to do that, one step at a time, we will always come back and talk in cycles.
Very true. Very true. You know something. I think Nigeria's major and greatest source of capital revenue is its human resources. That is the brain capacity that we have here. Look, I mean, I know brain drain is happening. Okay, but isn't it time for us to play defense? I mean, there are export programs for produce and goods and all of that, but why are we not amplifying the subject of brain capital to earn foreign exchange from right here in Nigeria, rather than having some of our best brains jackpying? I mean, I know this is possible. I mean, it's possible to work from here and earn FX to augment what is coming from our colleagues, the diaspora remittances.
Yeah. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead. I mean, the issue of capitalizing on our brain capital right from here, to earn FX at least.
So you're talking about the sad syndrome
and very quickly too, Ali Shatta, we were actually out of time.
Yeah, talking about the sad concept of Japarism is really disheartening that this brain drain is happening, because the truth is they are not only taking our brains out, they are taking our best brains out. And if you drill down, they are also taking more of our tech brains out. And this is very worrisome, because we are talking about modernization, we are talking about a tech-driven economy. Now, most of the young, vibrant youth that we have today who are tech-driven are
we seem to be having some network issues with you, Ali Shatta. Can you hear me?
Be the one sitting at, to help us, yeah, I can hear you. So they are supposed to be the one sitting back at home to help us, continue the process of, putting all the technology that we have in the country together to ensure that we
can barely, at this point, we can barely see your face. Your shot is so dark. At this point, we cannot we can barely see your face. But if you just adjust your computer a bit and face the lights and just round off for us at this point in 60 seconds, if that's possible.
It's okay.
Great. I think that's manageable. Please just round off your thoughts in 60 seconds, if that is possible.
Okay. So essentially, what I feel that is more painful for us is that we are not taking cognizance of what is happening. And you are saying, how can we take advantage of the situation? That largely goes back to tell you about the data I'm talking about. If I ask you sitting there that how many Nigerians have gone out of the country with this, Japa syndrome, you can't even say it. And even the Nigerian government cannot tell you.
Well, there are some figures out there anyways.
Exactly. So, but if you have that data-driven economy, you can capitalize on it and say, okay, human capital, this is what the tax that you're giving. So for everybody who is coming or who is, getting our resources outside the country, this is the amount of tax that you pay, for engaging anybody in the country. I think this is essentially what we need to do.
And I hear you, and I hear you loud and clear, and I get what you're saying. But I think it's high time we started to even begin, I beg your pardon, to earn foreign exchange right from our living rooms and our homes here in Nigeria. There are programs where, there are a couple of work from home programs where we are offering their expertise right from here, from their homes, whether in Aba or in Lagos or in Abuja or in Jalingo or Jigawa. And it's happening, but it's not so popular. I am hoping that, this is time we can take advantage of our massive very massive brain capital, and we begin to explore opportunities abroad and bring the forex back home here, spend the money back home here, and then that way we can also increase remittances there. Isa Aliu Shatta, I would like to thank you so much for coming on the program. Of course, I mean, your as always, your thoughts on this issue has been profound. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
You're almost welcome. But what I can tell you is that they've given us sort of foreign direct investment. So we are also getting those proceeds coming back home. So they are sending money back home. Trust me.
Thank you so much. Of course, I know that. Thank you so much. From the economy, we'll move on to politics. In the immediate past episode of Insight, I had two academics give their opinion on some key issues of national concern. The debate was on leadership. I mean, we did talk about the debate on leadership, I beg your pardon, and governance, devolution of power, as well as the subject of perpetuating prejudice on the character of Nigeria's political elite. Their views were quite profound. Let me ask you, since I'm with you on you rather already, let me ask you a question on endorsement. So let's just zero in on the elections proper and whether or not they impact elections here in Nigeria. I know they do in other parts of the world in some climes, but a lot of people have said that it was the politics of endorsement that brought President Muhammadu Buhari to power in 2015. Yeah, in Nigeria. Is that your opinion as well? And to what extent can endorsement impact on a candidate's electoral fortunes, whether it doesn't? I even saw in fact, we've seen market women do that all the time. I mean, to what extent do they impact, Dr. Remy?
Now, endorsements are very valuable and useful to have if you're a politician, but it depends on who's endorsing you. Endorsement generally, is the validation of your policy by different stakeholders and interest groups. Okay, what they are saying is that, look, we have looked at your program, we have seen your personality, we have seen your whole profile, and our association aligns with you that you are the best candidate of all available, that will advance the cause of our interest group. So let's say, for instance, like you have it in developed climes, the medical association, of medical doctors, for instance, endorses a particular candidate. What that generally means is that he has the best, program for healthcare. If ASU endorses somebody,
exactly, because they speak on issues that are on the ballot that affects them, and based on that, they endorse that person's program. Is that how it plays out here?
That's how it's supposed to be. It's the section of your manifesto, your program, that appeals to a particular stakeholder group or interest group or pressure group that makes them endorse Nnamdi as the best of the three candidates speaking now. Okay, now the extent to which that translates into electoral victory depends on the clout of that association endorsing you, or of that personality they are following. Okay.
So Falaye, I would rather take you up on something else. I mean, I somewhat suspect your view on endorsements because you live somewhere outside of Nigeria. You've experienced how endorsement works, so I kind of suspect that it's something you would agree to. But let me take you up on the issue of ethnic politics and religious politics in Nigeria. Unfortunately, we still contend with these issues here in the country, and some would say that the regional outlook of some of the major presidential candidates may be suggestive of impending challenge, one that could involve or that involves how these candidates are going to be truly perceived and whether they will be publicly embraced by some persons or some groups in some regions. This has been an issue for almost as long as we've existed as a nation. But then, how can we truly escape this narrative of ethnic politics and engender nationalistic politics?
Well, it's going to be problematic in many ways. When you have a leader that is embracing his own ethnic groups at the expense of others, when you have a leader that believes that my way or no way, like I've said, that's when you have.
But now you're talking about leaders now But then
Okay.
I referenced the candidates and having some of our candidates having these leanings, and then and remember we've talked about perpetuating prejudice. How do we escape from that that box that we've been in for far too long? Yes.
Well, it's not going to be done on a snap of hand.
Definitely.
It's a process.
Definitely.
But we have to start somewhere. But if, let's say, we have a government in place right now that is doing the right thing, people will embrace it. Oh, it doesn't favor its own ethnic group. Is fair to everyone. The appointment is evenly divided, is evenly distributed. People will appreciate that, But when there is a lopsided appointment, as an asymmetrical appointment, favoring one side of the country against the other, you are going to bound to have problems. That's no question about it. People will speak up.
Gentlemen, we're totally out of time, as a matter of fact, but very quickly before I let you both go, I'd like to know, and quite strongly too, your top 3 public policy issues, that you think should be on the ballot come 2023. I think I'll start with Dr. Aderemi first.
Well, I think the first thing, because you can't put something on nothing and expect it to stand, is to arbitrate, every to the micro level, of biases, of sectionalism, that we have in this country. We must stop, first and foremost, to reckon with Nigeria in terms of religion, ethnicity, gender, abilities, and all of that. Once we have that, then for me, we can begin to talk. And by the way, if anybody tells you now that I'm going to come as president of Nigeria in 6 months, I'm going to do this, it is fraudulent to make those claims. There are fundamental issues that we need to address before you need to stabilize before you develop. It's a logical sequence. So I think we need to first and foremost begin the construction of a nation state that all Nigerians will feel a part of without discrimination. Secondly is security. Thirdly will be welfare of the people. We must have people popular, what do you call it? People-centered, popular, government-oriented policies.
Great, fantastic. Those are your 3 policy points. That you think should be policy issues rather that you think should be on the ballot. Dr. Falai, your 3 top.
Firstly, I will say the nature of our federation, the federalism we have in the country.
That's one.
Because the nature of, when you have people are talking about amendment to the current 1999 constitution, they should not be talking about amendment to this current constitution. It should be tossed into the garbage.
But that is not true. You cannot say that, Dr. Falaye. I know you live in the United States, and I'm sure you're aware that even there in the United States, they've had to undergo constitutional amendments more times than Nigeria. Of course, because the democracy is older.
If Nigeria is to move forward, we have to come to a conference table to discuss the future of our country.
Is there a perfect constitution in any part of the world, Dr. Falaye? Is there a perfect constitution in any part of the world?
You say what?
Is there a perfect constitution in any part of the world?
Even American constitution. If you say American constitution, you say this is a movement to a perfect union. So it's not perfect. Even American democracy is flawed according to the economics democratic index. It's flawed. There's no perfect system in anywhere in the world.
Very true.
And there is no constitution that can self-correct itself. No constitution.
Very true.
People that are operating it, okay, from time to time we have to adjust it to reflect the reality of the society.
Exactly. So we do not have to toss it. We do not have to toss it into the bin.
They say let us take one issue from the exclusive list and put it to concurrent. No, let us sit down together and think about the geography restructuring of that country. That is the only way we can move forward. Because when you have some people that they think they are the custodian of a power in Nigeria for whatever reason, it's not good.
Dr. Fala, you've taken up all of your time for your 3 points.
New group, leadership should not come from this part of the country. If we are all Nigerians, a minority should have the right and people which were embracing to become
So, Dr. Falaye, let me help you make your submission. One is constitutional review or amendment. Two is unity, and three maybe security. Thank you so much. From expert opinion, I would like to go to the court of public opinion and see what the people are saying on the same subject matter. Let's get a sense of what the public expects to hear from the candidate during the campaign. Let's get their reaction.
As campaign begins, it's for them to come and tell us what they have for Nigerians. It's not for them to come and insult themselves.
I want him to identify the issues plaguing the common Nigerians and to, discuss objectively, how they intend, to deal with those issues.
You know Nigerian problems. Have you identified them? So what are the solutions? When you have problems, what are the likely solutions to those problems? You itemize it so that we know that you are coming with a solution.
I can say by next year or next week, I'll buy a Mercedes Benz for everybody resident in Abuja. It's a simple, police will not arrest me for making a statement. I have a right of speech. Is that not so? I can say I will next week, I will buy Mercedes Benz 450L for everybody resident in Abuja. That's what the people are doing. Anybody can make that statement. So if they are sincere, they should tell us how they want to buy the Mercedes. Where is the money? Do you have the money in the bank? How did you get the money?
We need Nigeria, how they can improve what the youth solve their problems. In fact, unemployment is everywhere. Even not to go to school. There was this strike that's on school. It's affecting the youth. Many youths are just lavishing.
There are issues of insecurity, fear of kidnapping, and the rest of them. They should try and, as much as possible. So
it's equivalent to what? A job application.
What I just have to say is that they should just try and stop fighting, and they just focus on PDP should focus on PDP and APC should focus on APC, and they should try and make Nigeria a better place because youth are suffering.
Well, it's not just the PDP or the APC. It goes for all of the parties. I do have a guest joining me via Zoom to discuss some of what we've gleaned from this Vox Pop. Dr. Stephen Iroro Izu is a political economist and development expert. Welcome to Inside Doc. It's been a bit.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Good evening, Nigerians.
What are your some of your thoughts on some of these issues that members of the public are saying, going by some of what we just heard?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. It is very clear that Nigerians today are more conscious than Nigerians before now. More conscious in the sense that Nigerians know what they want, from their leaders, and then they are not ready to just get empty rhetorics or empty, assurances. So be that as it may, Nigerian political leaders to be, those vying for the 2023 general elections at all levels, must begin to, to come up with tangible, facts of what they want to do. I've always argued that leadership goes beyond just the political aspects. We must look at the economics of leadership. Now, when leaders are only talking about politics, it shows that somehow some of them may be bereft of ideas. So the economics of leadership must also be hammered on, which translate to development.
So, Doc, you throw these whole economics of leadership into the mix, and I get a sense that some Nigerians feel like they have experienced or are experiencing a psychological contract violation with unmet expectations and all that. Isn't that expected? Even when the least of expectations are met halfway, there would always be critics and hailers, I suppose.
Yes, of course. Nigerians perhaps feel this psychological dissatisfaction because political leadership is supposed to be the torchbearer of society, according to J.F. Kennedy. Now, bearing the torch means that everything that represents darkness, will be extinguished, will be eliminated. Darkness in the sense that you have poverty, you have ignorance, you have epileptic power supply. Leadership is supposed to be in a position to ensure that these existential situations or problems that have been confronting the Nigerian state over a period of time, are done away with. So leaders who are coming to take up the mantle of leadership at all levels must understand the fact that Nigerians are beginning to experience, this frustration, aggression tendency because of previous, failures, of a past leaders.
Doc, let me borrow the words of Stephen Biko when he said, I would like to remind, and I would like to quote here, I quote, I would like to remind the black ministry and indeed all the black people that God is not in the habit of coming down from heaven to solve people's problem on earth. End of quote. If you put that against elections and governance in Nigeria, I mean, the people, you and I know that people are always praying, and they expect a miracle to happen. Isn't that part of the challenge? I mean, that Steve Biko highlighted, as against people taking their votes seriously, exercising their franchise, I mean, and electing a government that they can hold responsible, which in turn is answerable to them and also accountable as well to the people. So, and let me just ask you a pointed question. Do you think the people are the core problem that we have, or what? Because, like they say, if people deserve the leaders or the leadership that they get, since the leaders do not come from outer space but amongst the people themselves.
Now, you must understand the fact that Nigerian citizens, we are not very difficult to lead, and we are not also very difficult to persuade. Nigerians are people that want to give you the benefit of the doubt. So it's not as if Nigerians are the creators of their own problems or the kind of leaders that have emerged. Nigerians have been cheated, defrauded, duped, by a few, who have taken for instance, their hospitality, their trust, for granted. But Nigerians are waking up to this reality, to say, no, enough is enough. Let us get the persons who have not just the capacity, but who have that fortitude, of heart, to lead us to the El Dorado that we have always wanted. So I would not want to blame the people, because they have only been cheated, on the basis of the trust that they bestowed on a few, people who have somehow, not lived up to the expectation of the trust, given to them. So I think that leaders, must begin to, Nigerians are beginning to see that their leaders must be people that are not just accessible, before elections, but people that will be accessible even after the elections. So and they are it's all indications, shows that that Nigerians are towing that line of trying to remedy, this psychological blackmail on them, by previous administrations.
I truly hope so. I hope the level of consciousness, political consciousness and participation that we're seeing currently translates to, people actually participating in the polls, and we hope for greater and better things ahead. Dr. Stephen Iroro Izu, political economist and development expert, I would like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, as always. Thank you.
When water is released from dams, houses, offices, hospitals, transportation roads and bridges are destroyed. People even become homeless. Recently, the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency advised communities along River Niger in Kwara, Niger and Kogi states to relocate. This is as a result of water released from Kanji and Jeba dams. The dams are releasing water per minute that could lead to the overflow of River Niger. The agency also says there is the likelihood that Adamawa, Benue, Nasarawa and Anambra states would experience flooding following the release of water from Lagdo Dam in Cameroon. What are the implications and how can we prevent are recurrence? These are some of the questions my guest, Clement Nze, Director General, Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, will be answering. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on Insight.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here again.
Could you shed more light on the statement released by your agency regarding the latest release from the dams?
Yes, there are communities that are contiguous to River Niger or that are within the banks of River Niger. If you notice, all over the country there have been incessant, heavy amount of rainfall, leading to high saturation of the soil. Now, the dams are overwhelmed. By that I mean, it gets a certain threshold that to safeguard the life of the dam, the best thing you do is to commence a gradual release of water. And that's what both Kainji and Jeba dams have commenced to do. The implication is this, that the communities downstream the dams and very close to the banks of River Niger are going to experience flooding. We have been talking about this over the months of the likelihood of release of water from the dams, and incidentally it has come to be. So we advise communities and people that are doing business by the banks of River Niger to relocate. You can do that, and after some months, when the river must have receded, the flood level, you can go back to your business. But to save your life, we advise that these communities should relocate. The state governments, the state have been listed, the Niger, Kwara, and so on and so forth. They know themselves. I mean, they know the communities that are involved, even from our earlier prediction in the year. So the best to be done now is to relocate to higher grounds.
So relocation is a key thing now.
Yeah.
Now, the release from Lagdo Dam seems to be causing more harm. How do we curb this practice? Because the implications are quite grave. And we understand that the Lagdo management do have a practice.
That's been quite pathetic. You know, for quite some months I have been in contact with authorities in Cameroon, people that are in charge of the day-to-day run of the dams, of the Lagdo Dam, pleading with them to respect the letters of the Memorandum of Understanding signed by the two countries. I recall that in 2016, President Paul Biya was in Nigeria to meet with his Nigerian counterpart, His Excellency Muhammad Buhari, GCFR. They signed an MOU that in the event Cameroon must release water from Lagdo Dam, Nigeria should be notified ahead of time so as to evacuate their citizens by the banks of the Benue. Now, about 3 weeks ago, I called and sent text message. They are sure that whenever they are going to do release of water, they will notify Nigeria. Now, out of instinct, on the 14th of this September, I sent another message as a follow-up. Then I get a response that we commence the release of water yesterday, that being 13th, by 8:50 a.m. at the rate of 615 cubic meters per second. So from time to time, they don't notify Nigeria. As we speak, so many communities in Adamawa, Taraba, and Benue have been flooded. There's an immigration office at Urobok in Adamawa. That place has been taken over by flood. Go to Numan, go to Yola, and several other cities or communities within Taraba, Adamawa, and coming on to Benue. So they are fond of releasing water without informing Nigeria, breaching the content of the MOU signed by the two nations.
All right, before we talk about measures to be taken to curb the impact of these releases, what would the Nigerian government be doing regarding the action of the Cameroonian Lagdo management?
You see, in 2019, I was on another assignment outside Nigeria when I got a report from my officers in Yola that the dam, the river Nile Benue was overflowing. So many communities have been submerged. That was in October 2019. I called. They denied ever releasing water. Until much later, November 1, they told me that we opened our dam on October 10th and closed it October 31st, having 3 weeks of non-stop of release of water. Now, we took it up. The Honorable Minister of Water Resources in the Adam wrote a letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria with necessary documents relating to the MOU signed and requesting that he takes it up with his Cameroonian counterpart for breaching the understanding between the two nations. That one is being addressed. Why do you release water? Why do you breach the content of the MOU signed by the two nations? So that one has been enforced. And you try to work it out and see why such a thing should be done.
Affected persons have been directed to leave their houses. What? Do we have plans for these persons?
NEMA is already at work. They have the offices within those areas, within the state. And also working in tandem with the state emergency management agencies to see to what should be done to relocate affected people. Even though some of them may not want to do that, to be relocated. But NEMA is doing its best in that regard.
Well, of course, the rains would always come every year. But is there a permanent solution to this issue? Because people lose their lives every day to flooding, their property, some lose their jobs, their livelihood. Could there be a permanent solution to it?
You see, it's a natural phenomenon. Yes, we talk about climate change and so on and so forth, that we cannot stop flooding, but we can reduce its negative impact on us by taking necessary measures. If we know that there are a certain period of the year that this flood will occur, certain measures need to be taken ahead of time. There are structures that need to be constructed by governments. I keep talking about the sub-national, we have the state government. The measure that the state government should have taken, having been given advisories ahead of time to build some structures, barriers in some locations in their states that will release the flood that normally occurs. Talk about cleaning up their drainages, building drainages where they don't exist at all, and then taking the bull by the horn by removing structures that individuals have built within the floodplains. But we keep advocating the issue of taking the people away from those areas, and even individuals on their own to take their own responsibility for themselves to move away from the flood-prone areas before the flood comes. So it is both government and the individuals that have to take responsibilities, not just government, but individuals have their own part to play. And also, you can't just be waiting for federal government to come and do it in your own state. Let the states also take some steps to ensure that they secure the lives of their citizens, relocate them, build necessary structures that will prevent the flooding, remove structures that are obstructing the flow of flood once it comes. It is an annual event, so to say, that we should be able to have adapted or gotten some measures on ground to help us reduce the impact, even when we cannot stop it entirely. Federal government has done some work by way of consulting what we call flood hostels through the Presidential Committee on Flood Relief and Rehabilitation. We have it in some critical locations in different states in Nigeria, where people that are in flood-prone areas are relocated at such critical period of the year. They go there. They have their normal life there. Because facilities are already provided. You have clinic, you have water, you have, like a hostel in the secondary school. Kitchen where you can cook. Stay there for some months, maybe 2 months or 3, depending on the severity. After that, you go back to your normal life or where you live. But to stop flooding permanently, we know what is happening globally. Although this is the worst case scenario. What happened in Karachi, in Pakistan, where thousands of people lost their lives.
Clement Nze, Director General, Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency. Sir, we want to thank you so much for sharing tips with us on this segment.
Thank you so much. My pleasure to have been here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amina Mohammed, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala.